to Freshly Forever, a podcast that gives you fascinating insights week after week. Here's your host, Vi Kumar.
Hey folks, today I have the pleasure of talking to Chef AJ. Welcome, Chef AJ, to podcast Freshly Forever. What an honor.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I thought there's no better person than you to talk about the secrets to incorporating a weight loss regimen and living a vibrant life, just like you managed to achieve for your own self.
Right. And it took about 50 years. So if you're struggling with your weight, don't give up, because it took me a long time to get it right.
Yeah, I think it's never too late, correct?
Never too late. I've had clients in their 90s, so I know it's never too. As long as you're breathing, it's not too late.
That's well said. So you have been living a plant-based diet for a long time. Were you raised that way, or how did this happen?
I was not raised that way. Boy, wouldn't it be something if I was? Because the people that I've met that were, vegan since birth, they're extraordinary humans. They have no illnesses. They have perfect weight and height. People worry that being vegan is going to stunt your growth. I was raised in a typical standard American household. I was born in 1960. We were actually Jewish, so we did keep kosher. And I say that because of that, I never developed a taste for many animal products that other people just love. Like, for example, I never tasted lobster or shrimp or crabs or clams or oysters. We never ate things like bacon or ham or pepperoni. So for people that love these foods and can't imagine giving them up, well, I never had them, so I never craved them. They weren't part of our diet. Jewish people do eat animal products. We kept kosher, but we weren't eating that many different kinds of animal products. And even when we did eat them, you could only eat certain parts of them. So, I don't really understand the whole reasoning behind them, because to me, why is the liver okay and, this other part not? So I never really developed a taste for animal flesh. And I actually was really repulsed by it. Even as a young child, the only way my mom could get me to eat meat is if she burned it beyond recognition. So if she was making, like, say, a roast, it would have two end pieces. And then my grandfather would get one and I would get one. So I could eat the one that was like burned beyond recognition. But if there was any blood in it, because some people would actually order meat rare or medium rare, it was like so gross to me. And I was like, how do people eat that? You eat it because you dissociate the fact that it's a living being. We don't say, hey, can you give me, some medium rare cow? We call it something else. Other than chicken, we pretty much call most animals something else, beef, burger, no, it's cow, And I guess some animals we call the same name. But, if she made chili with beans and it had ground beef, I would eat it. But if it had a bone in it, if it looked like the animal, like, oh my God, like the turkey sitting there with the legs, or the fish were the worst. Even when I ate animal products, I didn't eat fish because fish looked like fish. Not in a can. I could eat that because it was a sandwich with celery and mayonnaise. But in a restaurant or even at home, it was served like kind of cut in half. The bones were there. The face was there. The head was there. It's like, I'm not eating that. It's like the eyes were looking at me. So I was just born with a sensitivity to animals and didn't want to eat them. And the thing was, I didn't really think they tasted that good. I mean, what tasted good about animals were the plants that we put on them. So for example, ribs taste good because of barbecue sauce. Boiled ribs, most people wouldn't eat, Of course, things like cheese, those things taste good to most people. I was born allergic to dairy, so that was always a problem for me. I did eat it, but now I know I always got sick because the allergy wasn't diagnosed until later. And I remember asking my mom if I could be vegetarian. And this was the 60s, and we didn't have the internet or Dr. Neil Barnard or Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And so she said no, not because she was being mean, because there was a belief back then, just like there's a belief now in some people that have not yet been educated or read books like Proteinaholic, that you need animal flesh and animal dairy secretions, not only to thrive, but to survive. But the day that I left home, which was September 1st, 1977, to attend the University of Pennsylvania, I never knowingly ate another animal product. And I say knowingly because, the first 10 years, I was what I called an imperfect vegan. So in other words, I was not as willing to stand up for myself as a younger person. So if I was at a birthday party and there was a piece of cake, yes, there was eggs in it probably, but So those little indiscretions that I would never do now, and I haven't done in 35 of the 45 years that I was vegan. And also I say never intentionally, I don't eat at restaurants anymore. I really, in the last 10 years, I might have eaten at the restaurant 10 times, and it's usually because I'm out of town or somebody says, oh, you have to go. It's so-and-so's birthday party. Really don't go to restaurants. But they have made mistakes where there have been animal products in my food and I've taken a bite. And so, and then I've gotten very sick from it too. So nope, I wasn't raised this way. Nobody in my family, except for my sister, ever had any interest in eating this way. And they're all dead or very sick with lifestyle diseases because of not eating this way.
Mm-hmm. So your weight loss journey, again, that came about also because of a health situation, correct?
So being vegan wasn't because of a health situation. That was an ethical situation. And when I was 17, I was attending the University of Pennsylvania because it was my hope that I would become a veterinarian, but instead I became a vegetarian because I was on a scholarship.
Something with a V.
Yeah, sounds same veterinarian, almost the same number of syllables. I was working for a veterinarian because I was on work study. I had a scholarship to this Ivy League school. And on the first day of the job, he handed me a tank of live salamanders and he said to cut their heads off. And I'm like, why? And he said, well, because we're doing protein lens regeneration experiments in the amphibian and we just need their eyes. And believe me, I didn't want to do it. I mean, even when I had relatives that twice had taken me fishing, once in a pond and one deep sea fishing, and I the whole experience sickened me. I don't want to be somebody that harms living things. Even
I don't blame you.
I don't squish bugs. So I became an ethical vegan, but I was not a healthy vegan for the first 26 years because I wasn't eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, and avocado. I was eating cookies, candies, pies, and ice cream. Yes, it was vegan, but it was unhealthy. I was eating processed food. I was eating junk food. Coke Slurpees, which was my breakfast every day with 8 pumps of vanilla syrup, is vegan. Dr. Pepper big gulps are vegan. Lots of things like Oreos and potato chips and French fries are vegan, but they are not healthy. So it wasn't until 26 years of being vegan. I was just shy of my 43rd birthday. It was January 1st of 2003. I woke up and I was bleeding from my colon. I had what it turned out to be, they call them edematous polyps, and the doctor said they were precancerous. He said that the kind of polyps you have always turn to cancer if not removed. But my colon was so dirty because I had not really eaten any fiber for 43 years that he couldn't remove them. So he said, well, you'll have to come back and, we'll do like regular surgery, like where you have general anesthesia and they cut you open. And I'm like, I'm not doing that because I do not like going to doctors. I love doctors personally. I love to interview them and socialize with them, but I am basically afraid of every medical procedure. I have a disorder, and it's because, I'll tell you why. When I was 19 years old, I had an operation. It was supposed to be what they call a same-day outpatient operation. I had to undergo general anesthesia for it. And I was allergic to the anesthetic. And when I woke up in the recovery room, I was being resuscitated by a team of respiratory therapists. And I was this close to getting on a ventilator. Now, at the time, my profession was respiratory therapy. And it is not great to be on a ventilator. Luckily, they use what's called the ambu bag. I was able to start breathing on my own. But whatever the allergic reaction did to me, instead of being in the hospital for just several hours, I ended up in the hospital for 6 weeks. Because I could not breathe. So because of that, it's shaped my life in that after that, I could not even have, I couldn't go to the dentist, couldn't get my teeth cleaned, all that kind of stuff. And so when he said, you're going to have to take medication, we're going to have surgery, I'm like, no, you don't know me. No way.
So the very idea of anything hospital related became traumatic to you.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so scary to me, like to go to doctors and every now and then, I have a little bit of orthopedic situations that once in a while I'll have to get in. I don't have to. I mean, I am a phobic patient. And that's why I'm very careful when I go to new doctors. I go, look, this is my history. I'm a nice person, but I might freak out. And when I say freak out, it's not like I'm going to bite the dentist. I just have a panic attack and start crying uncontrollably because I'm really that afraid. And I say that because other people would have been like, okay, well, let's schedule the surgery. This is important to the story because it was like, no way. And so I didn't know what to do. And so I had this magazine, but I didn't have time to read it in the office. And I'm like, this is a really interesting magazine, because I had always wanted to go to a spa. And it's funny, because I've since had the privilege of working in a spa, a 5-star resort called Rancho La Puerta, for probably over 20 times the last 10 years. This magazine called Discount Spa, it intrigued me because they had places you could go that weren't $5,000 a week. And this was in the summer of 2003, and it was called Optimum Health Institute. And it was something like $875 a week, which that's very reasonable, because most hotels, that's about, unless you're going to a Motel 6, that's about, $100 a day. That's all your food. That's pretty reasonable. And so I looked into it, and I didn't really know what I was getting into, but it was like the greatest thing of my life, because it turned out it was a place of healing, and it still is. Now, if we had internet back then, I probably could have researched this more, and I might have ended up at the True North Health Center. But I ended up at the Optimum Health Institute, and it was a wonderful experience. This was July 6, 2003. It was a Sunday, when I had the taxi cab driver pick me up at the train station in San Diego. And I asked him to take me to the 7-Eleven, because I had read somewhere on, on the material that you can't have like your own food. Like if we catch you with food, you're kicked out and you don't get your money back. And I'm a frugal person. I'm like, if I paid you that money, I'm going to get this experience. Usually, like, I would separate my Coke Slurpee and my Dr. Pepper by several hours, till I needed my next fix. But I said, take me to 7-Eleven. And I drank both of these like at the same time. It was like the last time I had sugar or caffeine, to be honest. And I went there, and it was a really miraculous place. There were about 300 people there, all walks of life, all over the world. They never called a disease or an illness. They called it a health opportunity. It was really interesting.
How nice.
Yeah. Because the language was really important, because they believed also not just in the physical level of healing, but in the metaphysical part that a lot of, unfortunately, medical doctors, ignore. And that is part of healing. And
verbiage is so important, right? How positive you sound definitely contributes to internally how you feel and how you can transform yourself also.
Absolutely. I do believe in that. I believe in prayer and all those things, but I also believe in going to the doctor. I think those things can be combined. I don't think it's one or the other, especially if you have a serious illness like cancer or things like that. But with the physical part of it, they didn't have MDs teaching there, but they had doctors of chiropractic, they had nurses, they had psychologists. And it was the first time in 43 years of life that anyone in any profession said that the food you eat has a profound effect on your life, on not just how you look and how you feel, but on what diseases you actually end up succumbing to and reversing. Because this notion,
you are what you eat, is something that's, I wish everyone would realize that, correct? Even like you said, even the medical system doesn't seem to think a lot of times that, like after surgeries, people are told, or even I have heard after a procedure, hey, you can go eat pizza. But definitely I knew that was not the ideal food for me.
It's crazy, isn't it? And, you're right. Like I remember, I told this story before, but there was at one time when I visited a colleague who was in the emergency room, and while they were awaiting his tests, they had said, well, we're not sure. You're either diabetic or had a heart attack or both. And then it was dinner time, and they bring him, while they're awaiting this, a plate of food for dinner. And it was beef stew, a white piece of bread with butter, and a carton of milk, and a piece of apple pie. And I'm like, this is what you feed people awaiting their tests when they have diabetes or heart disease. So I don't know if things have changed much in hospital setting, but yeah, you are what you eat. And this has been around for a while. Hippocrates even said, let food be thy medicine. I know that because I frankly didn't care. And I really think the reason is because I was addicted to sugar. I call myself a food addict in recovery, but it wasn't just sugar. It was sugar, flour, oil. It was, it was junk food basically, and caffeine actually. Mm-hmm. So at the Optimum Health Institute, they fed you only raw living foods, and they fed you only vegan food, whole plant foods. Well, actually, they did do some juicing, but it was basically fruits, vegetables, and there were some seeds involved. They did make
Mm-hmm.
some seed cheese out of fermented sesame seeds and sunflower seeds, which a lot of people didn't care for, but it was my favorite thing because that's the only thing that we got that had any calories. There was some caloric density to it. So I actually ended up liking that very much. And there would be classes all day. Like you were busy there from about, I don't know if the program's changed. It's been almost 20 years. And I actually went there twice, once to their campus in San Diego, once to the Austin campus, which was another wonderful experience because they only have 25 people there. So it's totally different because the first time I'm glad I went to San Diego because when you're doing something unusual like this, it was nice having all those other people there because it's a 3-week program, which I did week 1, week 2. I never did week 3. So you have kind of people like, you're not as scared because people have been there and they kind of take you under their wing, and they had all kinds of people all over the world. They had professional football players there that week, trying to drop weight. They had celebrities. They had people from, all kinds of different countries. It was quite nice. And they fed us the food, but we were in these classes where they taught us that disease can't exist without inflammation in the body, and that all the foods that most people eat, which is mostly animal products and processed food, are inflammatory.
They're inflammatory.
Yeah. And even what I was eating as a vegan, caffeine, oil, flour, sugar, junk food is also inflammatory. It was the first time anybody ever said that to me. So I was very thankful for that. And they would have testimonials every Friday, I believe it was. Somebody would come back and talk about how going there, they were able to overcome their disease. And these people had things like brain cancer, lupus, Lyme's disease. And I thought, well, my condition isn't even cancer yet. So this is going to be a piece of kale.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You said piece of kale. Yeah. I love that. And it's also equally interesting how much you have pointed out already that being vegan alone, doesn't mean one can be healthy, right? And eating plant-based alone doesn't mean, somebody is already healthy. It's about still what you eat, being, on a plant-based diet. So what exactly is the reason you think people gain weight?
Well, I think it's because of the fact that they're eating a diet that is not consistent with the species' natural history. If you look to nature, I love something once said, whenever there's a problem or a question, look to nature. And if you really look to nature, there are no overweight species in nature. You might see some underweight animals as they get older and they're about, they get sick. You've seen, people have sometimes seen like a coyote or a fox and they're about to die. Yes. But you really don't see any overweight squirrels unless they're being fed by a human, overweight fish, or you really don't see overweight animals. And animals don't have to weigh and measure their food on a plate or count calories, carbs, or points. Of the millions of species that exist on the planet, there's really only 3 that have ever been overweight. And one is human beings, and the other 2 are domesticated dogs or domesticated cats. Or if there's another pet that I'm excluding, you could maybe argue that, but there's no overweight snakes. There's no birds that are so flat they can't fly unless they're being fed by humans. And when
makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's true. Dr. Doug Lisle has said this, and he's right. The only time you see an overweight animal is usually when it's a pet and it's eating processed food. So when you eat the diet that was consistent with your species' natural history, yes, people are going to come in various shapes and sizes. Genetics plays a role. Even if we all were locked up at the True North Health Center and ate the same diet, there's going to be leaner people and thicker people, but you're not going to find overweight people or obese people unless you're eating the wrong diet. And so people become overweight, not because they eat too much food, which is the popular belief, but because they're eating too many calories. And they're doing that because they're eating foods too high in caloric density, higher than they evolved at. And Dr. Lisle, who's an evolutionary psychologist who I adore, who co-wrote the book, The Pleasure Trap with Dr. Lisle, often talks about how we evolved at a calorie density, our species did, of about 700 calories per pound, which means all the food we ate, or most of the food we ate, was 700 calories per pound or less. And at times we had food higher in caloric density, and that came from meat, which was about 1,000 calories per pound or more, or honey, which was about 1,800 calories a pound. And if you look to the only hunter-gatherer tribe, or one of the only hunter-gatherer tribes left, the Hunza in Tanzania, they basically eat the way I eat in terms of no sugar, oil, salt, flour, alcohol, lots of plants. But they do eat meat and they do eat honey. So they're still eating a diet that's fairly low in caloric density. But what happens is when you process a food from a whole food, you exponentially increase its caloric density. And so if people just ate whole foods as they existed in nature, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, these foods are 600 calories per pound or less. And then even if they included some of the higher calorie plant foods occasionally, like nuts, seeds, and avocado being 750 calories per pound, nuts and seeds being about 2,600 to 3,200 calories per pound, they would still be fine. But you see, most Americans eat most of their calories from animal products, which is of a higher caloric density than what I call to the left of the red line, or processed food. Now think about it. Processed food, flour, sugar, these are about 1,800. Bread is about 1,500 calories a pound. Sugar is about 1,800 calories per pound. Oil is 4,000 calories per pound. These are not foods that our ancestors ate throughout most of human history, and they're not foods that are eaten in certain parts of the world today that are healthy and don't have the diseases of lifestyle we have. So it's not that we're eating too much food, and this drives me crazy when people think the only way to lose weight is to weigh and measure their food. They have to understand the work of Dr. Barbara Rolls at Penn State University on calorie density, because Dr. Rolls has a laboratory where she studies human eating behavior, and she determined by studying humans of all ages that we all eat about the same amount of food per day by weight. And that's about 3 to 5 pounds of food in order to feel full and satisfied. Most diets will tell you to eat less food. What I'm telling you to do is change the calorie density of the food you eat. So when you cut out these really high calorie foods like oil, which is not necessary to human health, if you feel you need fat, you can get it from a tablespoon of flaxseed or have an ounce of walnuts a day. So when you cut out these processed foods like the bread, the sugar, and you're eating whole plant foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, you can actually eat more and weigh less and lose weight doing that if you are overweight.
Okay. And what do you say to someone that would ask, hey, how do I conquer cravings? How do I conquer my food addictions? Say you were used to, all the sugar-based stuff and everything, right? So how is it that you as a person overcame those food addictions? And what is your 2 cents worth to anyone that would ask that question, Chef AJ?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you have a true addiction that you ever overcome it. I think basically you manage it. And the way I manage it, which is the way I recommend if you're able to do it, is with abstinence, meaning if you don't have, like I said at the beginning, I never craved pepperoni pizza because I never had it. You can't. It's not possible. If you never had a cigarette or a drink of alcohol, you cannot crave these highly addictive substances. And so people that are raised, and I know some of these people without eating sugar and flour don't crave those foods because they're just not in their repertoire or in their memory. And so cravings can be physiological, but they can also be emotional and psychological. And when you indulge a craving, you actually don't make it go away. It's sort of like if you have an itch and you scratch that itch, the itch becomes itchier. And then you have to scratch it more and more until eventually it bleeds and maybe it becomes infected. When you indulge a craving, you intensify the craving. So there's a few things you can do. The first thing I recommend is abstinence. And it's really hard because people then have to acknowledge that it is an addiction, because if it wasn't an addiction, you would be able to be abstinent from it. So like people that drink alcohol, not everybody that drinks alcohol is an alcoholic, but if you can't stop drinking, you might have a problem with alcohol. Whereas if I said, you know what, guys, the secret to health and longevity and weight loss is please don't eat okra anymore, I don't think anybody would freak out and say, okay, but I have to have okra. I have to have it every day. And food addiction quiz in my book, The Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss. But what I recommend for addiction is abstinence. The thing is most people aren't willing to do it because it's too hard. And the reason it's hard is because you're an addict. Because if you weren't an addict, it wouldn't be hard.
Okay. And speaking of abstinence, how important is it then for anyone to approach their weight loss journey meticulously? There's crash diets, and then we see the negative impact of it. And a lot of us tend to set New Year resolutions and say, hey, this year I just want to, do this exercise program or, lose this much weight or whatever. Before we can realize even, we have already stopped doing that, right? Even early part of January, a lot of people tend to give up on it. And there's studies and research.
Oh yeah. I think I read somewhere that in the United States, we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. And usually by then people are already off their program, and they're to the gym anymore. So it happens pretty quickly. Well, I think the best thing I can advise you is don't go on a diet in the first place. If you change your lifestyle and eat a health promoting diet, you will not only reverse diseases that you may already have and prevent future ones, but the weight will take care of itself. The problem is people want a quick fix. It generally took a while for people to gain the weight that they have. Weight loss happens very slowly. People that look at me now compared to when I was obese, they're like, wow, but they don't understand. It took me 27 months to lose the weight. That's over 2 years. People are in a hurry, but change happens slowly with weight loss because if you're doing it successfully, you'll lose about 2 ounces of fat a day. You can't even measure it. And so if you're weighing yourself every day, it's ridiculous. You want to weigh yourself, if at all, once a month, because it takes that long to do it, unless you're going to do some kind of crash diet, which I believe for most people is not a good idea because, you know, it starts dysregulating your hunger hormones of ghrelin and leptin. You can white knuckle it for a while and eat less food, or people try this ridiculous thing called OMAD, 1 meal a day, and then it's going to backfire. Because you're meant to eat enough food to be satisfied. And you can do that when you change the calorie density of your food. I eat more now as a slender person than I did when I was 50 to 70 pounds heavier because I understand caloric density. So I can eat huge pounds of, you know, vegetables and salad and fruit and sweet potatoes and rice because I'm not eating things like peanut butter sandwiches and bread and cakes and candies and cookies. I mean, I still eat those things, but I found a way to make them lower in caloric density using fruit and oats and things like that. The dieting industry is an $800 billion a year industry. People just aren't willing to change their lifestyle and they're not willing to do some form of abstinence to the foods that are the problem. But the people that do it, I tell you, I've worked with lots of them. It works beautifully if you're able to do it. I tell people do the least restrictive eating program that you can do that will give you the results you seek.
And so it's important to also not be malnourished, right? In the process of trying to lose weight. And so, like you said, focus on the calorie density foods. So how can one feed themselves right? What is your advice to people? Because again, that's going to be another question that people think about. And one wouldn't want to be hungry. And just like, again, you said 1 meal a day and things like that, that's probably that's when it becomes short-lived, correct? The whole journey.
Well, you know, there's so many wonderful books and documentaries out there now that can help people and meal plans to help get you started, like Forks Over Knives and things like that. But if you're hungry, eat, but eat the right foods. Eat foods in their whole plant form rather than in their manufactured plant form. So you want to eat foods that come from a plant rather than foods that are manufactured in a plant. Eat fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, which are beans, split peas, and lentils. If you keep your calorie density that low, you don't have to weigh and measure your food. And there's so many different wonderful cooking methods, from steaming, Instant Pot, air frying, where you don't need to add sugar, oil, and salt to your food. But the problem is when people are addicted to their food, especially the chemicals of sugar, fat, and salt that fool the brain's satiety mechanisms and cause them to overeat, it can take a period of adjustment for them to actually like the food. And that's what happens. People don't give it enough time. There's a place in Santa Rosa, California called the True North Health Center where people water fast. And you do not water fast to lose weight. People water fast to reverse diabetes and high blood pressure and in certain cases cancer. But when people do go on a water fast, what happens is this process of taste neuroadaptation happens very quickly because they're not having anything but water. And then when they break the fast, which is usually with some juices and then steamed zucchini, everything starts tasting amazing again. But the problem is because people are eating so much fat, sugar, and salt, they don't appreciate the kind of food I eat, like roasted sweet potatoes and broccoli, which to me, you know, eating this way for over 10 years tastes amazing. But, you know, this is where, you know, recipes and chefs and can help them. But the thing is there probably will be a brief period where the food doesn't taste good to people. But if they stick with it, one of the things I recommend is eating a lot of green vegetables because there are compounds in green vegetables called thylakoids. That's why I recommend people have vegetables as part of their breakfast, not the only thing they have for breakfast, because these thylakoids seem to, Dr. Greger talks about them in his book, How Not to Diet, but it seems to turn off the hunger switch and block fat absorption and actually help people fight cravings for unhealthy food. But really, if people find themselves overweight, it's because they're eating too much high calorie density food or animal products. They're eating processed food. food that comes in a can, a box, a bottle, or a bag. Eat whole food as found in nature. Don't be pouring sugar, oil, salt, flour on it, or alcohol. And most people will lose weight until they're very close to their ideal weight. It's not complicated. It's simple, actually, but for most people, apparently it's not easy.
Back in a moment with our guest on Fresh Leaf Forever. And so that takes us to the 7 C's of success, right? Like you mentioned in your book.
Yeah.
Want to talk about that?
It's funny because they all start with the letter C. And the first one is commitment. And I always tell people, there's a thing where people have said, find your why. And I've heard it say, well, find the why that makes you cry. And I think once you know what that is, you just have to commit to it. And I always recommend people actually make it public. That's where, I've seen people like on social media do that and say, whatever you're committing to. And by the way, it doesn't mean forever. When you're making a dietary lifestyle change, I don't recommend people like on the first day say, you know what, I'm going to be 100% whole food vegan and I'm going to eat perfectly, never have sugar. No. You do an experiment like Dr. Doug Lisle says, where a period of how about 21 days, 3 weeks, or maybe 30 days? I wouldn't go much longer than 30 days, especially if you've never done this before, but commit to a certain period and commit to a person. If you have a coach or a mentor or a Facebook group, that you're just going to do your very best for a period of 30 days. And then you're going to reevaluate. You're going to see how you feel, how you look. And then you can decide whether or not on day 22 or day 31, there's a holiday called Lent where a lot of people give something up they really love, like alcohol, coffee, or sex or chocolate for 42 days, which is why I say 21 days, half of Lent. If you've done Lent, you can do half of Lent, but commit to it for that period of time, because I believe that, when you commit, it's a lot less likely that you'll quit. So I think commitment is very important when you're trying to affect permanent dietary or lifestyle change. And the second C I talk about is the word compliance. And I learned that from Dr. Alan Goldhammer at the True Northwest Health Center. He uses that word a lot because I've heard people that I've worked with, or just people say, I was really good today because I ate kale for breakfast, or I was really bad today because I ate a donut. And so instead of thinking about your eating habits as good or bad, I like to tell people, well, if you went off plan, it's not that you're bad, because if you ate bad, then you're a bad person. You just weren't compliant on the plan you say you were going to do. Or you can also use the word adherent, which is the same thing, but compliance means just following a course of
action.
Yeah, course of action. So like in medicine, if the doctor told you to take this medicine once a day and you did it, you're compliant. If you didn't, you're not compliant. Doesn't mean you're not a bad person. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you weren't compliant on that day. So guess what? If you're not compliant, then next time be compliant, right? So that is the second C. The third C is really important. It really is. I mean, they're all important, but this one, without consistency, I don't think you're going to be very successful in any area of life, because, it's not what you do once in a while that matters, if, for example, falling off plan, but it's what you do consistently. And I always think about athletes or musicians. They are at the top of their game because they practice. Even they may have natural talent, they still practice hours and hours a day. I once met an Olympic gold medal winner on a cruise. And he was on a break, and he, I said, "Oh, do you have to, how much do you have to train?" He goes, "Oh no, it's not training season. I only have to exercise 2 hours a day." And I'm like, "What?" Like nobody even exercises 1 hour a day, and here he is on vacation, and it's like, "Oh no, it's just 2 hours a day now." And it's like, well, gosh, how much is it when you're like training? Oh, 6 or 8. So the point is consistency. He didn't stop exercising because he was on a cruise, right? And so your thing is you have to be consistent. And one thing that I think that can help with that is keeping a food journal if you don't have a coach you're working with, because you can just see then where there's some holes in the program or when you fall off it. Because having a food journal, that is like having a commitment, because if you commit to writing things down, then you're accountable. See, commitment really does keep you accountable. I remember,
and that can help you become compliant.
Absolutely.
And that can help you become consistent. They're all tied to one another.
they all work together for good. And the fourth C is cooking. When I used to give this talk in person, the fourth C was continuing education. But I realized, then the pandemic happened. People weren't going to conferences. They could still do really well if they would learn some basic cooking techniques. You don't have to be a gourmet chef, but you got to know how to bake a potato. And I say that because I once had a 44-year-old client in our first session. She goes, well, how do you microwave a potato? And I'm like, oh, this is bad. So you have to have some basic cooking skills, which isn't hard. You get an Instant Pot, you can watch some YouTube videos, get a good book, but you have to be willing to somehow get that food in your house so that it's in your mouth. There are food delivery companies now that make compliant food. It's not as expensive as you would think to hire not a chef, but a person that can help you prep. But I think having some basic cooking skill doesn't have to be great, just so that you're getting healthy food there, so that the healthy choice is the easy choice. I think that really helps. And the fifth C is change. There's an old saying that nobody likes a change except for a wet baby. But if you're not willing to change, nothing's going to change. So sometimes you have to change, not just what you're eating, but where you're eating it or who you're eating with. People sometimes have had to change friends that were food bullies or get out of relationships with people that were enablers. But the thing is you just have to be open to the possibility that you're going to have to change some of the things you're doing and the way you're doing them if you want to be successful.
It just calls for some minor tweaking and some minor lifestyle modification that can yield big results, correct?
Absolutely. There's a saying, if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always gotten. Or a similar saying, insanity is doing the same thing in the same way and expecting a different result. Mm-hmm. So being willing to change, and change can take time, and especially where weight loss is concerned. The 6C is community. And I have seen more people waver because of this one, I think, than any other, because, we evolved in small villages and people really like being part of a group. And if you're the only one that's eating plants, it can be really hard. You can feel isolated, which is why it's never been easier now through the pandemic, because people are very connected now with Zooms and classes and programs. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have an in-person program, which you can often find through a free website called meetup.com, having virtual friends that are eating the same way as you, it can be very, very helpful, especially if none of your friends or family in your immediate sphere are doing something healthy. And then the 7th C is compassion. You are not going to probably get this on the first try. Mm-hmm. You smoke and you quit smoking. Most people don't quit on the first try. It takes sometimes 7 or more tries. And so whether you're just trying to follow a plant-based diet or lose weight on a diet, you're probably going to have some slips. So you have to forgive yourself, and you do that by having compassion, and you have to have compassion for yourself. You have to have compassion for other people that are not necessarily eating the way you're eating. Certainly, in my opinion, have to have compassion for the animals in the planet. Because if you continue to eat them, well, with the animals, of course, you're hurting them and they are suffering terribly. And so is the planet because of that.
And the role of fiber, you talked about eliminating sugar, fat, and all of that. And why do we eliminate fat? Is that because it enhances cravings? And is that why we need to choose fiber instead?
Okay, so I don't tell everybody to eliminate fat. And first thing, you have to understand there is fat in everything. In greens, 3% of the calories from greens are omega-3 fatty acids. In oats, almost 20% of the calories come from fat. And so I don't tell people to eliminate fat. I tell them to eliminate oil. There is a big difference. And I have another book called Unprocessed, where I make the case that if you are going to eat fat, which we do need, eat it in its whole food form, which is nuts, seeds, avocado. Eat it raw, not roasted, not salted. And if you're going to eat coconut, which is really high in saturated fat, then we're going to want to, have the coconut meat, not too much of it though. So the thing is as I mentioned earlier, when you process a food, you make it calorie rich and generally nutrient poor. So let's take olives, for example. Olives are only about, I can't remember if it's 500 or 600 calories per pound, but you process it into olive oil in a toxic way, which generally involves a chemical called lye. And now you've removed everything beneficial about the olive, the fiber, the water, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytochemicals, the antioxidants, and the micronutrients. And you're left with the disease promoting sludge, which instead of having about 600 calories per pound, has 4,000 calories per pound. Without fiber, you'll never feel full. So if you want to have some olives on your salad, that's fine. If you want to throw a few nuts on your salad, but don't have walnut oil, have a slice of avocado or two, don't have avocado oil. Avocado is 750 calories a pound. Avocado oil is 4,000 calories a pound. Fiber is important to every bodily process. It tricks the brain into feeling full on fewer calories. It removes cholesterol and other waste products from the body. But where weight loss is concerned, fiber, when it's in a food, a whole plant food, and water, when it hasn't been removed, say, for example, through dehydrating, when you have fiber and water together, which you do in whole plants, they create what's known as bulk. And bulk is what creates satiety, which is what allows you to eat until satiety and feel full on fewer calories because you're activating your stretch receptors. And fiber has almost no calories. And I think it's something like 1 calorie per gram.
And so what do you say to people that would ask, hey, how do you then cook without oil? Do you just steam your foods?
Well,
and what about potatoes, sweet potatoes? Are all of that okay? And so
yes, absolutely.
how do you just feel satiated? And some also tend to think, oh, if I have to eat plant-based, then it just means I'm eating everything raw and nothing can be delicious and things like that. There's all these myths,
There's
right?
a lot of this. And you know, the myth that nothing can be delicious isn't true, because I worked at a restaurant that wasn't even vegan, and my food was delicious. Okay. I was the pastry chef, and I didn't use sugar, oil, salt, and it was, and I wasn't even hired as a vegan chef. When I got the job interview, you do a test day where you just go in their kitchen, you make a bunch of stuff, and they hire you. I was a vegan, making vegan food in a non-vegan restaurant. So I don't believe that things aren't delicious unless you're so addicted to animal flesh and cheese and sugar, fat, and salt. That is generally not the problem with that. But as far as the cooking, you know, it's hard to explain, you know, when people can't see the cooking about the use of oil. So that's why I do, you know, classes. I do free YouTube videos where I show them. I think I actually have one that's called How to Saute an Onion Without Oil. You just don't use oil. I'm not being facetious, but you don't need oil to cook. Oil is for cars. It's not for humans. And so you get a good pan, whether that's a stainless steel pan or a piece of waterless cookware made out of titanium, or a nonstick pan if you're comfortable using that, and you just cook it. If it starts to stick, you put a little bit of liquid. It could be water. It could be vegetable broth. But there is no, you know, reason, like mechanically, that you need oil to cook. Now, even to fry now, you don't need oil because we have machines called air fryers. So oil is a triumph of marketing over science. People think they need it. You know, their brain needs fat. If you're worried about fat, there's a blood test called the fatty acid profile. You can see if you have enough fat in your system. But if you want to use fat, use nuts, nut butter, seeds, seed butter, tahini, avocado. You don't need oil. It's like it's crazy. And if you're trying to lose weight, good luck trying to lose weight eating oil. And that's one of the main reasons I don't eat at restaurants, because I don't believe it's possible to get a truly oil-free meal. And they use more oil, sugar, and salt than we ever would at home.
What about potatoes and sweet potatoes? And is going plant-based the best way to achieve optimal weight and health?
Well, that's been my experience and the thousands of people I've worked with. I mean, it's generally the most delicious, the most affordable, the most friendly towards the animals, the environment, and yourself. I'm sure
it's
there's
more natural.
Well, I mean, what did from the Garden of Eden, we ate plants. And it wasn't until a certain part in human history where we started eating animals. We were not a vegan, species, but we certainly didn't eat only animals. Like this carnivore diet is ridiculous, or keto. We always ate large amounts of plants. And again, look to nature. Look at the last hunter-gatherer tribe. Yes, they're eating some animals, but they're eating a lot of their calories from tubers. So I think the plant-based diet is the perfect diet. It's the most compassionate diet. It's the most delicious diet. And it's also the most affordable diet, unless you count just going to McDonald's every day a diet. So it's a diet.
Yeah. And some people tend to think, potatoes are bad, but there's so much nutrients in potato too.
Oh my God. People think potatoes are bad. They're afraid of the lectins in beans. If potatoes are bad, how did Andrew Spudfit Taylor lose 120 pounds and reverse his food addiction and depression, eating nothing but them for an entire year? How did Chris Voigt reverse his high cholesterol and other markers of health, eating nothing but potatoes for 2 months? How did the two individuals in the KON, the Con Potato study, eat nothing but potatoes for a year and end up with no nutritional deficiencies? I think people are just not educated to the science, and that's why we need all these wonderful doctors like Dr. McDougall, who are telling the truth about nutrition. I really recommend you listen to some of his broadcasts.
Oh, yeah, I'm already familiar and I eat plant-based. So I'm just so familiar with how to cook and eat that way. But it's just that, like it becomes a huge awareness issue. And even when I have to go find a meal somewhere outside, for me to, just get something other than anything very raw, even if it has to be, somewhat cooked, sometimes it just seems like people tend to think, oh, how do you do that? And I have an athlete, my daughter, who eats plant-based, and she's just able to achieve her peak performance. How is seasons, how do those impact weight loss, and how best can people approach?
I think some people really do well when they're doing a group experience. I mean, there are people, it's also going to depend on your personality. If you're a highly introverted person, you might be just fine with just having this information, or maybe having a couple sessions with a coach or a mentor or things like that. But a lot of people do better when they have the accountability. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to even be in a group, whether it's a free group or a paid group. Sometimes just having a buddy, a neighbor, a friend, just to be accountable to, like for exercise, for example, that they don't necessarily have to eat the same way as you. But if you have a plan with a neighbor to go for a walk every day, you're more likely to do it, because if you don't, you're kind of bailing on your friend or neighbor. And it's the same thing. You could have a buddy where you text each other your food back and forth. So there are
commitment.
Yeah. Having that commitment and because like I said, you have the accountability. It's not easy for most people to change their habits, especially if they've had them for a long time. They usually have to want it pretty badly. And unfortunately, most people want it when I don't want to say it's too late, but they don't want to be proactive. Like there are a few people like my husband who, when he got this information, said, well, why wouldn't I want to eat this way and be heart attack proof? Most people wait until they get a disease, and then they'll like, okay, well, now I'll do it. I'll wait.
They look for solutions.
And then it's even harder. It's so much harder to do it when you're under the threat of a surgeon's knife or having to go under dialysis. It's just so much easier. But, and then the longer you eat poorly, the more you just indulge these addictive tastes. It just takes harder and it's longer. And that's why it really starts. I don't even want to say it starts in the womb. It starts with the mother's diet before she even gets pregnant.
Oh, totally agree. And what about some common frustrations that you find when you work with clients, that you think people wrestle with in their weight loss journey? And what would be some substitutes, say, for meat eaters, for them to kind of change to, say, like a plant-based eating regimen?
Right. With meat eaters, it really depends, because there are these analogs now. I've never tried them, Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger. Some people think they taste good. And so for someone transitioning, that might be a good idea. I make plant burgers that are amazing out of beans, out of grains, out of potatoes. So to me, those taste great. It's going to depend on the individual. And there are ways to get meaty textures from things like mushrooms.
Exactly.
So there are ways if people want to simulate the taste and texture. I eat fairly simply. But you said, I think the first part of the question was, well, what are the
common frustrations?
Okay. So I think, again, I haven't seen everybody. I've worked with tens of thousands in my groups, but probably at least a couple of thousand individually. And one of the common threads I see, or the biggest problems to people's success, is they don't live in a clean environment. And so, in other words, if you went to go back or to live in an environment with all the foods that make a person fat and sick, it's very, very difficult. And so the unwillingness to live in a clean environment, I think, is the biggest stumbling block. And it's usually a female who's married to a husband who's very disagreeable or not amenable, or the kids aren't amenable. And so they're basically, even if they're not directly sabotaging the person, it's very hard for them to live in an unclean environment with non-compliant food, and to have to make that food for their family. I see that as a disaster. And I won't say that if you live in an unclean environment, you won't be successful. I've seen maybe 3 people in my whole life really be successful at getting to their trimmest ideal weight and health if they wanted. But I will tell you that I've never seen anybody in a clean environment not succeed, which is why I really believe in the statement that Dr. Doug Lisle made to me 12 years ago, which is you must work harder on your environment than you do yourself. And if a person is unable to live in a clean environment because of other people, then that is time to have a private session with him. He's a psychologist and he can help you negotiate that. But that's usually what I see is the reason.
Okay. And do women have to approach their weight loss journey differently because of hormone issues and things like that? Or do you think across the table, just sticking to a plant-based, whole foods, unprocessed diet definitely helps most people?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in that. If you did want a hormone expert, who's really wonderful, you could interview is either Dr. Neil Barnard, who wrote Body and Balance, or Dr. Frank Sabatino, who knows quite a bit about hormones. When women get to be around menopause, I'm told that it's harder for them to lose weight. I can't attest to that because I did not go through it. I went through it, but I don't know when I went through it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't have any symptoms. I couldn't tell you exactly when it happened. So I lost weight at the age of 51. And that would be around the time that I think most people started to be perimenopausal or menopausal. And I will tell you that I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism when I was 50. So at the time that I was losing weight, albeit slowly, 27 months to lose 47 pounds, I was in menopause probably and unmedicated with hypothyroidism. So just because it's more difficult doesn't mean it's impossible, but people have to be patient, eat the correct food, and wait and let the calendar do its magic.
Okay. And as a pastry chef, you were doing with no sugar, no oil, and you were doing a lot of fruit-based desserts, correct?
Well, actually, when I worked in the restaurant, they were calorie dense, not calorie dilute. So I was doing German chocolate cake and peanut butter chocolate cheesecake. So I was using dates, but they were still very, very rich desserts because I was using chocolate and I was using nut butters. So these are not things that I have eaten in many, many years, but because I'm still a pastry chef at heart and actually writing a dessert book right now, I have learned to satisfy my sweet tooth with the fruit, the whole fruit, and nothing but the fruit. So making more fruit-based desserts rather than nut-based desserts or chocolate-based desserts.
Oh, how nice. And takeaways and tips for anyone to feel motivated, stay healthy and vibrant, and keep their body weight off. What would you say to that?
Okay, well, here's the thing. I don't know if it's possible for somebody to stay motivated. I really don't. And if you rely on motivation, you could be motivated in the short term. For example, you just got a diagnosis, and if you don't lower your cholesterol, you're going to go on medication. You could be motivated because your daughter just got engaged and you want to look good for her wedding. But motivation doesn't last. There's a really famous motivational speaker named Zig Ziglar says motivation doesn't last, either does bathing. That's why we got to do it every day. And so I don't believe in motivation. I believe in setting your life up with a clean environment and having healthy food already ready and batch cooked so that you don't have to rely on motivation. You rely on healthy habits. I think, and if all you have is healthy food already prepared in your home, you're going to eat it because you're going to be hungry and there won't be any other choice. So I think it's a mistake to rely on motivation. That doesn't mean you should never feel motivation. I mean, some people, for example, get inspired. They watch my talk called From Fat Vegan to Skinny Bitch. It's on YouTube for free. So some people, that's motivating to them. People participate in online groups where people are motivated, people are interviewed with success stories, or they watch the Truth About Weight Loss Summit that I host every year, where we see people like Josh Lajani, or Chuck Carroll, who went from 400 pounds to their trim ideal weight. So those are the kind of things that can be motivating, but I don't think you can rely on motivation. Okay. That's my opinion.
Would you like to add anything else about your daily YouTube shows? And
I really enjoy it. I've done over 1,000 episodes in just a little bit over 2 years. And I never expected this to happen, because when you think about it, most people do a show a week. It would have taken most people 20 years to do what I did in 2. I've met wonderful people from all over the world that I probably wouldn't have met otherwise, and reached more people. So that was the gift of the pandemic. And until further notice, I will continue to do it every day at 11 a.m. Pacific time on YouTube. I also stream it to Facebook and Twitter, but it's much more fun if you would watch on Chef AJ's YouTube channel, because then you can participate in the chat and see the show notes. And I look forward to interviewing many more wonderful guests, and just try to anybody that has something positive to say in the world of plant-based, I hope that they will contact me to be on the show.
Oh, what a fascinating conversation. And the website is chefaj.com. Is that
just my name?
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to share such useful tips. And they were just very simple ones. It just calls for some basic tweaking and, like you said, cleaner living environment, and then eating whole food, plant-based. So thank you so much, Chef AJ, and look forward to many more conversations in the future.
Thank you so much.
To listeners, thanks so much for tuning in week after week. Follow me on Instagram at YPKumar. I will see you back again next week with yet another guest and yet another interesting topic. Until then, it's Vi saying so long.